Let's talk about Russia's Battalions of Death. I mean, that name alone, right? It sounds like it's ripped straight out of a movie script. But this was a totally real and honestly mostly forgotten story from World War I. Okay, so look at this photo. This is from 1917. And no, these aren't actors in some historical drama. These are actual soldiers, armed, ready for battle. And here's the kicker. They're all women. So you got to ask yourself, right? In a time when combat was, exclusively for men, who were these women? And what on earth was going on in Russia that made them send women to the front lines of the Great War? So to really get how an idea this radical even got off the ground, we've got to rewind the clock. We're talking about Russia in 1917. And to put it mildly, things were bad. The country wasn't just like losing the war, it was completely falling apart at the seams. I mean, think about it. 3 years into this brutal war, the Russian army is just shattered. We're talking millions dead. Soldiers are just walking away from the front, deserting like crazy. The will to fight, it's gone. So the new government that's in charge, they are absolutely desperate. They'll try anything to turn things around. And so this is the wild idea they come up with, the women's battalions. And look, these weren't just meant to be extra troops. No, this was an all-female, honest-to-God, last-ditch effort. And their real mission? It wasn't about winning battles with guns. It was all psychological. The whole point was to try and shame and inspire the male soldiers to get back in the fight. So yeah, this is the key thing to understand right here. These battalions were never really about military might. They were a propaganda weapon, plain and simple. Their target wasn't the enemy, it was their own army. And it was a pretty clever psychological operation, actually. It wasn't just a vague, rah-rah, let's get inspired kind of thing. Nope, it was a very specific, two-pronged attack on the mindset of the male soldiers. Okay, so here's how it was supposed to work. Part 1, revitalization. The idea was to show these demoralized guys a bunch of patriotic women ready to literally die for Russia, and hopefully that fighting spirit would be contagious. But part 2 was a lot more direct. It was about shame. The message, even if nobody said it out loud, was crystal clear. Hey, if women are willing to fight and die, how can you, a man, just sit this out? Pretty powerful stuff. So you can't deny it was a bold plan, right? Super unconventional, and the original vision for it was huge. But as we're about to see, what they planned and what actually happened, well, let's just say there was a massive gap between the two. And they were not thinking small here. The Ministry of War authorized 16, that's 1-6, separate all-female units. This wasn't just some token gesture. We're talking 4 infantry battalions, a bunch of communications detachments, and get this, even a naval unit. So on paper, it looked like they were all in. And at first, the call to arms totally worked. Something like 5,000 women came forward to volunteer. And these weren't just one type of person. They came from all walks of life. They really believed in this, They were ready to serve their country in the most hardcore way imaginable. But here's where that grand plan just slams into a brick wall of reality. Remember those 16 units they authorized and those 5,000 volunteers? Well, out of all of that, only 2 battalions ever made it to the front lines. Just 2. That's a huge drop-off. And it tells you that something went very, very wrong. So what happened? Why did this ambitious plan just fizzle out? Well, the simple answer is that the military brass pretty much immediately started seeing the whole thing as an unreliable project. And once that happened, support for it just vanished. You see, from the get-go, the military support was kind of half-hearted. You have to remember, Russia was dealing with massive shortages of literally everything. Boots, bullets, you name it. A lot of the commanders were really skeptical. They saw these women's units as just an experiment, and they were not about to waste precious supplies on something they weren't sure would even work. Which, of course, brings us back to the million-dollar question. Did it work? Did this whole big propaganda experiment actually succeed? Did seeing women at the front really shame the men into fighting again? The official answer from the military? A big, fat no. It was a failure. They concluded that the battalions just didn't have the effect they were hoping for. The army's morale didn't get a boost. And once that judgment came down, well, that was pretty much the nail in the coffin. By August 1917, we're talking just a few months after this all started, the military decided, okay, we can't keep dumping our scarce resources into this thing. They officially labeled it a failed project. And that was it. That decision kicked off the end of the whole experiment. It was a remarkable idea, but it was super short-lived, and it was dismantled just as quickly as it was put together. And man, the end came fast. By September, some battalions were already disintegrating on their own. Then, after the October Revolution, the new Bolshevik government came in and made it official. They ordered all the women's units to be dissolved. By the beginning of 1918, it was all over. But it's so important to remember, we're not just talking about stats and unit numbers. I mean, look at the faces in these pictures. You can see it, right? The determination, the hope, the pride. These were real people who signed up for something they believed in, only to have the whole thing pulled out from under them. But the story doesn't quite end there. For a lot of these women who were now trained soldiers, the fight was far from over. Russia was about to plunge into a horrific civil war, and many of them took their new skills and experience and kept fighting, some for the Reds, some for the Whites. Their combat story didn't just stop because their official battalions did. So what do we make of all this? What's their legacy? Are they just a weird historical footnote, a failed propaganda gimmick born out of pure desperation? Or should we see them as something more? I mean, yeah, the whole thing started for propaganda reasons, but were these 5,000 women actually pioneers? Were they accidentally setting the stage for female combat soldiers just 100 years too early? It's a really complex question, and it's what makes this forgotten story so fascinating to think about.